I think the biohybrids, because when I say that thing they have done, right? So for anyone who isn't familiar with DARPA, right? It's the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, a mouthful.
They added the D
they
later,
added the
right?
D for defense, but it is the most powerful, most secretive, most productive military agency in the world. And I kind of believe that before I wrote the book, most people had not heard of DARPA. I mean, I think, or at least when I was doing press for it, it was like shocking.
I think you're right about that.
So that's fascinating. And part of that has to do with DARPA likes the public perception of, that they like do all these things for the good of humanity. And actually, we know from the declassified documents again, or actually this was not declassified. This was the statement by the first SecDef at the time, the SecDef at the time that the DARPA was created, Neil McElroy, an advertising executive who became a Secretary of Defense. He said he went to Congress to get the funding, and he said this agency is going to create the vast weapon systems of the future. That is what DARPA does. They are always 20 years ahead of anything that you or I know. So any technology that is like, what the hell was that I just saw and you're not supposed to have seen, that's DARPA. Right?
They were doing Neuralink in the 90s, right?
They are always doing things 20 years before you know about them, because they do what is called blue sky technology.
Blue sky
right?
research and technology, yes.
And they have to be ahead of the curve. They have
That's
to be,
amazing.
right?
Is DARPA the only, I mean, when it comes to this kind of stuff, like innovating weapons for defense and national security, that's probably the only thing, the only apparatus that exists that's doing unlimited blue sky sort of research and development, right? Because they have unlimited money.
That we know of, but nothing surprises me anymore. And so when you find out there's like some agency you've never heard of, it's like, oh, of course, right? Like, look at NRO, the National Reconnaissance Organization, right? National Reconnaissance Office, okay? NRO was created in 1961. No one knew it existed until 1993, when it was declassified. So they were involved in the first technology, the first satellites technology. So when I interviewed Dr. Bud Wheelon, who was the first director of science and technology at CIA, he identified himself as the mayor of Area 51 because he worked out there. And he built the first satellite called Corona. This is like back in the old days when it literally took wet film images, dropped the wet film, and the Lockheed pilots would retrieve the film as it floated. The canister of film floated down from space with a parachute attached to it. I'm not kidding, right? So this is NRO. They're in charge of everything above, right? And it was so classified, no one knew it existed for more than 30 years.
Is it true that NRO officers or people in the NRO have to be cleared through CIA, NASA, and something else?
That I don't know, but I do know they have their own classifications.
Air Force, that's what it was.
Yeah, I mean, they all kind of work with one another, for one another, I mean, one of the guys I interview in Nuclear War, Richard Garwin, who designed the thermonuclear bomb, drew the plans for Edward Teller, right? When Edward Teller couldn't figure out how to actually make the bomb explode, Richard Garwin drew the design that allowed it to, right? He's 93. He was a major source for me in Nuclear War in my book, right? He was one of the founders of NRO. So they all work part and parcel. But the point of this, when you say, is DARPA doing the most advanced technology? Maybe, but maybe there's another organization like NRO. I mean, people forget there are at least 17 intelligence agencies. It's not just CIA.
17?
17. I mean, Google them, look them up, right? That's why there's now a director of national intelligence. So there are, and I think that to stay ahead of the enemy, air quotes or not air quotes, to stay ahead, the federal government is always playing not just chess, but move the magic balls, right? And what's under what hat. And so things need to be hidden so that secrets can be kept. When the F-117 was retired, I went to the ceremony with Ed Lovick, the grandfather of stealth technology, right? And it was amazing. It was up there at Lockheed at Skunk Works, okay? And they made this announcement that was I just remember this one line, and I am paraphrasing, but they said, like, we created the F-117. It was like a 20-year project, DARPA. And for 20 years, I think there were 10,000 people cleared on the program. This is what the guy was saying that was giving this speech. And he said, and no one leaked it. And then he said, oh, correction. It was actually 10,000 people cleared plus Tom Clancy.
What? Oh
revealing that, Tom Clancy had the in with the Lockheed guys. And that's where he got a lot of his secrets.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I had these two guys on here who I think you had on your show as well about 6 months ago. One of the guys' name was Len Baer, and the other guy's name was he was a Harvard graduate who was recruited to a think tank to work on some stuff for DARPA, and they were talking about this directed energy stuff.
Yeah.
And this guy was claiming, he had this Russian accent, which was funny.
Yeah.
And
yeah, Len.
Yeah, Len. And he was claiming that he was being actively targeted by some sort of directed energy weapons that are coming from satellites or something. Not something that somebody's hanging out in front of his house, like pointing something at him, but it's some sort of like switch that's going off in his head.
Yes.
But he has no history of working with any government. He worked, I forgot what he did, but he was a
medical doctor.
He was a medical doctor, right. He was like a hormone
and
doctor.
He's a safety inspector for a food company now.
Right. So like there was no plausible reason why anyone would be targeting him. You talked to him.
Yeah.
What did you make of that stuff? And do you think that's anything that you think is what they think it is?
I have kind of a history on this issue. Because I'm out there as a CIA whistleblower, I attract a lot of people who have this complaint.
Mm-hmm.
I happened to be on contract with the American Psychological Association back in 2015. And we were at lunch one day, and I said, hey, guys, it was like a dozen psychologists. I said, guys, I got a question for you. Not a single day goes by that I don't get at least one email from somebody saying that the government is beaming some sort of waves at them, and it's painful, and it's making them, vomit, and they have dizziness and whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, does any of this make sense to you? And they looked at each other and started laughing. And one of them said, this is a very common form of mental illness. They have found in their studies that when people feel overwhelmed, their brains default to the most easily explained reason, and that is a dark outside force. Well, that's why everybody blames the CIA. Now people know more about DARPA. They're talking about DARPA. But then I talked to a New York Times reporter about this. And he said, so many people are quick to blame mental illness. But he said in his research, he found that there are some people who are just incredibly sensitive to the millions of waves that are flying through the air at any given time. Cell phones, radar guns, anything. If we could see the waves, we wouldn't even be able to see each other. There are so many of them. Right? And then I talked to Bill Binney, who used to be the number 4 at NSA. He was the chief technology officer at NSA. And I said, Bill, is this mental illness, or is this like sensitivity to microwaves, or what is this? And he said, I think that there's science behind it. I think that DARPA is doing something that we don't fully understand. He said, we do know that DARPA is working on these, not just next generation battlefield weapons, but 2 generations battlefield weapons. Lasers that will temporarily blind you so that we don't have to kill you, but it'll take you off the battlefield.
Crowd control.
Crowd control is a perfect example. Yes. He said, we don't know if it's DARPA that's doing this kind of thing. But, he said, I can tell you how you can tell who is insane and who's not. Ask them if the waves follow them when they travel. He said, there is no technology to beam this stuff from satellites. It's not possible.
No.
But he says, if it just happens when they're at a certain location, if it just happens when they're at home, or it just happens when they're at work, that's a problem. It's either a sensitivity or somebody's doing something to them. But if it happens like everywhere they go, or they went to their brother's house and it happened there, and then they checked into a hotel because they thought they were going crazy, it happened there. No, that's a mental illness.
This is my business right now. I'm a tech consultant for underwater, mostly ocean technology, but space too.
Okay.
And I've advised a whole bunch of ocean drone companies, surface, undersea, and there's a whole range of types. The types I owned were oceanographic, so they were long endurance. They're called gliders. So they have a thing called buoyancy propulsion, where they use an air bladder to change basically the buoyancy, so it goes up and down, and you throw some wings on it.
Ooh, whoa, that thing's spooky.
Oh, so that's an article I wrote. That's pretty cool. That is the Manta, a DARPA developed ocean drone. Yeah.
DARPA developed ocean drone.
That's right. Yeah.
Oh my god.
Yeah. That is a badass looking drone. I don't think it's operational, but I'd like it to be. So,
wow.
Yeah. But and the other piece is a paper, article I wrote on ocean drones, a revolution.
We're turning into the aliens ourselves.
I know, exactly right. That's the interesting conversion. We're not. Are we the origins of all these NHIs, and we're just seeing our relatives?
I think so.
I think we are.
I think so. That's my favorite hypothesis out of all of them, is the time traveler one. I think that's the most compelling one. I know it's hard. I know there's a lot of people to try to debunk it, and there's a lot of questionable holes in it. But goddamn, just with like the history of human beings and our evolution and like the way we're going is like dropping sperm counts, dropping testosterone, fertility rate dropping off a cliff. And are you familiar with Michael Masters, his extraterrestrial hypothesis? Like if you look at all the abduction accounts of taking sperm and eggs from people, if there was some sort of cataclysm in the future, they would want to come back in time to replenish their population in the future with sperms and eggs of people in the past. And goddamn, that's interesting.
Heck yeah. And I tell you, my wife and I, we both are into this topic together. Mm-hmm. And it's an interesting journey we've been on. And I can tell you how it started. But quickly, we would have thought 2 years ago, this is all a bunch of BS, abductions and all this. But man, now that we've met abductees, and we've read John Mack's book, by the way, which is really heavy, and The Communion by Whitley Strieber, and we've met him. They're documenting all. So when Whitley wrote the book, he got all these letters, and they're all housed by people who said they had the same experience, and they're all housed at this place called the Archive of the Impossible at Rice University.
Mm-hmm. So MK Ultra is the merging of two things. The first thing gets merged is this idea from Dallas that they're going to study it. Then there's another guy who's a 1937 surgeon, SS guy named Kurt Plotkin. Plotkin worked with the Nazis. His idea was mind control through the use of Mexican peyote. So he starts doing his stuff, and the CIA is looking at the effect of light and wireless technology and things like that these guys are using. And they begin to study it. They hire a guy named Sidney Gottlieb. Mm-hmm. Gottlieb runs the program from 53 through which we think 64 before, of course, all these things are destroyed. But there's a lot of interesting things that the government finds out that is transferred to DARPA. When does DARPA first form? 1958. Mm-hmm. So all this information from the CIA and FBI are transferred into DARPA.
Right.
DARPA then takes it the next level. They go and they hire a guy in New Orleans. I told you we'd eventually come back to New Orleans. A guy named Alton Oster. He's first an FBI asset as a surgeon, but then he becomes a CIA asset because of this issue here. They go and hire a PhD researcher named Delgado, and he's working in the Tulane neurosurgery department and neurology. They get him out of that really quick, and they send him to Mexico, and they start putting wires into the bull's head to find out, can they stop and control the bull using electric signals? Why? Because they already have started to learn about Becker's work. So now this is the idea. Now they're trying to execute. They're trying to use this as a weapon.
Yeah.
Got it?
Right.
So what happens, in this whole time, the crazy stories that you've heard Bobby and I talk about on the Tetragrammaton podcast, where Gottlieb basically takes the Air Force plane over St. Louis and drops LSD on the whole city in the mid 1950s to see the effect. They found out mescaline didn't work, so the next step after that was to use LSD. That's one of the famous things that we did find out from the Church Commission that they physically did. So this is what I would tell you is Operation Northwoods, probably negative 2.0, which is when the government thought it was a good idea that they could just do whatever the fuck they wanted to the United States populace, they wouldn't know it, so they didn't need any informed consent. Okay? A lot of people talk about Tuskegee and the airmen and the syphilis. Dude, there's a pattern with the industrial military complex. When they want to do something, they don't even ask for forgiveness. They don't ask for permission either. They just do it. So when they do this and Gottlieb fails, what sightlines are really good for DARPA is this work that Delgado's doing is amazing. So they said, okay, you could do it with wired technology, and they were able to turn the bull off as soon as he was going to spear the matador. They said, let's try to do this wireless. Why? They had all the patents and everything they stole from Tesla. They also had all Marconi's work. At this same time, remember, Motorola is now one of the guys that's the industrial military company. They know that wireless telephony is actually coming. So they decide to employ it here first. So Delgado finds out that actually it does work. You can do it without wires. You don't have to do brain surgery on the animal to do it. And then they asked the next question.
They didn't have to install anything in the brain?
No, they did not. But this was the key step. This is the step where I think your audience, people find it incredulous when I tell them. The next step was, could you do this using light and light alone? And it turns out they found out you could. If you use blue light specifically, it actually destroys the dopamine reward tracks in your brain. Just so you know, Meta and Google today own those patents. Remember who's the Google patent attorney? Nicole Shanahan. So I said, Nicole, do you remember all the work you had to do? And she goes, yeah. She goes, I could never figure out what all this was about. Well, you need to know a little bit about Google's history. Google was formed in 1995 when DARPA gave the search algorithm to these two cats from Stanford. You know about Stanford now, right? Mm-hmm. You talked to me about Huberman, why they don't want to talk to me. You started to put two and two together yet?
Yeah.
So the issue is, these guys created the internet. They connected all these colleges all over where the academicians were to share this information. So this information is going all around in this area. They basically then figure out and perfect the delivery of blue light technology through screens. Who is the big tech company in the 1950s and 60s that were doing this? Turns out that's IBM. And IBM is working on liquid crystalline displays. And I remember, this is in the 50s and 60s. You as a young man never saw those TVs until the 90s. Mm-hmm. Okay? And then it got a boost from who? Obama, who made the analog to digital transition so that you'd have to use what? LCD screens. And then what else did he do? We're going to ban incandescent bulbs. Why? Because incandescent bulbs not only have fake blue light, but they also have purple and red, which is what you need as the antidote to blue.